In this texture area guide for the 3D modeling, we will be discussing how to use some of our pre-made 3D clipart to create areas of 3D texture. We will then also discuss how to use these to create new and interesting patterns, and then import bitmap images from online textures we have found on the internet. We can then use these to create our own texture fill areas, which we can save and re-import into future projects to allow ourselves to have a large library of flexible textures for future work. Let's get started by closing down this project. So let's create a new file. And for this one, we're going to set it as a single-sided job with a size of, let's say, 26 inches for the width, 24 inches for the height, a thickness of 3.75. We'll have the Z0 set as the material surface, and the XY datum position can stay in the lower left corner. Since we'll be working with some 3D components, I'm going to set the modeling resolution to be very high to get a better amount of detail from it, and then I'll just click OK to start my project. So now that we're into our project, let's first go to the Clipart panel, and here you can see a list of all the different folders of Clipart we have for the software. We've got these texture area tiles and texture fill tiles, which will be very important later on in our tutorial. However, for the moment, we're going to start off with some normal Clipart files to show that you can use these to create your own tiling Clipart. So I'm just going to open up the animals one, and let's scroll down to the eagle, which is just down here. Here we go. So I can click and drag this into the project, or double click it to have it automatically dropped into the center for me. So I'll just double click it for now. And here we go. We've got our eagle in the center of our project now. Let's switch to a double view so that we can see the 3D project at the same time. As you can see here, we've got our 3D eagle. Let's reset the view and go back into the modeling panel. From here, we just want to activate the Create Texture Area Component tool. And then from there, we can see that we have a number of options on how to create our texture. I'm just going to click Apply to show you the basics of this as it is with the default settings. And as you can see here, we've got our eagle creating a tiled texture across the 3D component and the 2D view. If I then click Close, you'll see here in the components list, I have got my component 1, which is the tile I've created. And I've also got the eagle's head original, which has been hidden. If I turn this back on, you'll see it appear in the 3D view and the 2D view, but let's just hide it for now. And with the component 1, you can see that this is its own separate component, and I can move this around in the 2D and 3D views like I would with any other 3D component. However, as a tiles clipart, it has one unique property, where that when I try to resize it, I'm not resizing the clipart itself, but instead just the area that the tiling is taking place over. So I can increase and decrease this as required. I can also rotate it using the handles on the clipart, and I can delete it as a normal piece of clipart, which I'm going to do now. So I'll just press the delete key and unhide my eagle head original and reselect that. If for my tiling I want to have, let's say, a smaller eagle head for each tile, I need to resize the original. So I shall just click on the original to bring up the transformation handles and use the corner to drag it smaller and to create a smaller eagle head. Now, if I go back to the texture area component and just apply again, you'll see I've now created a smaller, denser eagle texture. Let's reset this and close for the moment. One last thing before we then go on to the more detailed options in the texture tool is we can also use a basic vector as an outline for our texture. So I'm going to use this draw ellipse tool, and I'm just going to create a basic ellipse in the center of my project, and I'm going to make this 15 inches by 6 inches in width and height, which you can see in the values next to my mouse pointer. As you can see here, I've got my new oval. I shall close out of this tool, and then I shall have this selected along with my clipart. So let's go to the modeling panel, hold Shift and click on my clipart, and you can see I've now got the vector and the clipart selected. Now, when I go back to the texture area component and just click Apply, you can see now that the texture is constrained within the original vector size. However, now that we've created it, it is not actually linked to that original oval anymore. I can click and drag it to move it away from the oval, and you can see it's not actually within it anymore. Likewise, if I resize this now, it contains the original oval shape, but I can change the size and rotation as required. So you can see here I can rotate it, and I keep the same size original eagle with my new boundary. So let's close off the tool here, delete off the texture I've created and the vector, and I'm just going to unhide my original eagle again so I can start showing you some of the other texture options. So I'm just going to resize the original eagle back up to a slightly larger size for this example, and then I'm going to open the texture area component tool once again, and then I'm going to adjust some of these spacing options. So to start with, I'm going to add a 50% to the spacing of the Z and the 50% to the spacing of the Y. When I click apply, you can see now that my eagle is far more spread out than it was before. Likewise, I can adjust these individually as much as I need to. So if I put a 25% in the Y, you can see that the gap has been reduced in height so that you can more finely control how large your texture is going to be. These values also can go negative if you wish to start creating some overlaps. So a -50 spacing will bring them in so that they start merging into each other, as you can see here in the 3D view. And again, if I do this in the Y coordinate and have a -50 there, you see we have a very densely packed amount of eagles now. Let's put these back to 0 for the moment, and just click apply. So let's now have a look at the XY shift values that we see here. These change the offset of each of the corresponding rows and columns for the texture. So for example, if I place a value of 50 here into the X shift, then as you can see here, every other row is now 50% pushed across in our texture. Let's put this back to 0 again and show you the same in Y. And as you can see now, it's every other column is now shifted by 50%. So let's now just put that back to 0% again and click apply. And the final option we've got here now is for some reflections. So these will affect how each of the 4 components are going to be reflecting against each other in this 4 group here. And then this gets replicated across our tiling set. So for example, if we change the bottom left option here and then just click apply, you'll see that the bottom left of each of these 4 sets is now facing in the other direction. And this can be continued through 4 different angles. So you can see now that one has been flipped, and now it is flipped in the opposite direction. And then for the last try, it's back to its original orientation. So you can use this to get some very interesting looking results. So for example, if I've just applied a few rotations there, you can see we've got some changes going on. And if I then change, let's say, those around so that they match on both sides, we've got 2 rows of different facing eagles. So let's run through this from the beginning again. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reset my component and close out from the tool. So let's use all of those together to create our first texture component. So let's open the tool with our component selected. Let's put in a spacing of -25 and -15, a Z shift of 0, a Y shift of, let's go with a 65, and then we're going to flip the 2 right-hand components and then just click apply. And as you can see here, this has created a very densely packed eagle, which we can then use as a texture for a larger project. So let's stop with the eagle for now. Let's reset, close, and I'm just going to delete my eagle component. So let's try making a textured frame, for example, a possible project you might want to make for yourself. So I'm going to create a rectangle which is going to be the same size as my whole material space. I don't want to have a rounded corner on this one, so I'm just going to square that off and click apply. Then let's use the offset tool. And I'm going to offset this rectangle inwards by, let's say, 2 inches. We want to keep sharp corners, and we don't want to delete the original, and we don't mind if we select the new one. But as you can see here, we've now created our 2-rectangle frame. Let's close out of the offset tool and look in our Clipart folder. We'll go to the texture area tiles, and I'm just going to select one of these textures. Let's go with a rock grain Clipart, and I'll just drag that into the project. And you can see here we've got our rock grain. Zoom in so you can have a close look. Okay, so let's now go back into our modeling panel. We'll select our 2 vectors, and then we'll hold shift and we'll click our Clipart to make sure all 3 items are selected at once. And then we're going to go to create a textured area component once more. And without changing anything in the form here, let's just click apply. And as you can see, we've quite quickly created a basic texture for our frame here. And because this is a 3D component, we could then apply this to other 3D components to give it more height and depth if we need to for our design. Or raise it up, for example, to create a rocky frame effect. And as you can see, you're not limited to a single vector for the boundary for your textured Clipart component. So it's a very powerful tool, and with only a few steps you can create some very useful components. And for some more variety, you could start applying some of these Y shifts, or change some of these reflections. So let's just change a couple of those and click apply. And you can see it just gives it a bit more randomness across the texture, so that it doesn't look quite so uniform. Let's reset that and close out. And I'll just delete all of the components I've created to start a new one. So let's look at some more Clipart examples we can try to work with. So back into the Clipart panel, we have this rough V11 Clipart, which we're just going to drop into our job here with a double click. Let's go back to the modeling panel, and with this selected, we're going to create a new texture area component. And as you can see, if I just click apply now, we just get a bunch of little weaves across the job. So let's try a few values out. So let's go with a -50 for the spacing on X, and then add in a 50% vertical spacing in the Y shift. And then we'll just mirror the right-hand options. And when I click apply, you can see here we've now got a tightly woven weave pattern. But if I decide that this pattern is a bit too compressed, what I can do is use the Edit Texture Area Component option at the top here, and this will highlight the original donor component, which we can now adjust as we want to. So let's say if I want to scale it up, once I let go, it will recalculate, and you can see now we have a much larger weave, which could better suit what we're trying to do with this. And while the Edit Texture Area Component option is active, we can resize this at any time to create different shapes and sizes. We can also scale it only in X or Y if we needed to get different effects for our 3D component that we're creating. So let's turn the transform object back on, and as you can see, I can now move the entire texture by itself and scale it again. So I'm going to reset for now, close out, and delete this component. Let's show another Clipart example. So let's go back into the Clipart panel. We have our texture area tiles again, and we're going to use the domed pyramid scallop 1. Bring that into the job, and let's resize it just slightly smaller. Let's go to the modeling panel and open up our texture area tool again, and we'll just click apply to see what it looks like to begin with. As you can see, we've got quite a nice texture going on here, but I think for this one we're going to want to do some reflections. So if I rotate these around so that they all are lining up to create an outer circle here and click apply, you can see we've got a very nice symmetrical display here going on now from just a few changes in the design for the reflection setup. Let's click apply and close. So now that we have a 3D component texture that we want to save, we can save this out as a 3D clip file. To do this, right-click on your component name and use the Export as 3D Clipart option. Give this a moment to calculate, and when it's done it will open up the Save File window for you, which you can then give your file a corresponding name to make it obvious what it is. So in my case, this would be domed scallop texture. And then when I click save, that file is now saved on my computer, ready to be re-imported in the future. So let's say I'm going to delete this component here, and then I have my clipart in a file off to the side, which I'm just going to click and drag from the folder and drop it into my project. And as you can see, I now have got my clipart ready to use, and I can use this in any future project I choose to. Let's delete this again and unhide the original clipart that was hidden in the components list. And I'll select that and delete it too. So this time I'd like to bring up an important point when working with the texture area component tool. So let's bring in another piece of clipart, one that we can easily see which is horizontal, such as this ridges file here. As you can see, it's clearly going horizontally with the lines in this design. We'll go back to the modeling and we'll just create a basic texture area component once more. And you can see, as expected, you can see clear lines going across the work in the x-axis. So let's say I wanted it to go vertically up instead. So some people would say, well, let's go and change the original component. So I shall reset and close, and then I'll just rotate this 90 degrees by using the 9 key on the keyboard. So I'll press that twice, 1, 2, and you can see now it's clearly going vertically in the y-axis. When I now go back to the texture area component and just apply once more, you'd expect it to create a vertical lined component. But as you can see, the software knows that it's been rotated and uses it in its default form when sampling it to create these texture components. So what you want to do is rotate the texture area component after it's been created. And there you can see we've easily created our vertical lines instead. So keep that in mind when you're working with your textures. However, if you do want to edit the original component, then let's remove that and bring back our original. What you can do is bake this component. So if we select our component and go to the baking option here, this will convert it into a baked component. It is now newly created in this orientation. We can then go back into our texture area component and click apply, and you can see the texture area component is now using this new orientation from the baked component. So let's reset, close the tool and delete our component. So far we've seen a number of cliparts which work well with the texture area component tool. However, not all work quite so well. For example, let's bring in this egg weave design. Now if I go to the modeling panel and open our texture area component again, if I click apply, you'll see we get this rather nice effect in the 3D view. However, if I was to, for example, let's say, add any kind of spacing to this in a positive value, you can see it breaks up the design and we don't get our satisfactory tiling effect. Likewise, if I put that back to 0 and then put in any sort of shift in the XY shift, so let's put in a 25% shift, you'll see likewise we no longer get the nice joining effect and they all become disjointed. So do keep that in mind when you're working with your textures, as some will want to line up perfectly with the corresponding corners of their neighbouring component parts in the tile. So let me close out of this one, and then we're now going to look into how to create some of our own textures from designs found on the internet. Let me go to create an component from a selected or imported bitmap, and then I'm going to use this wall file that I found online. And it's important to remember that this file I found is from a specially designed texture. Try doing an image search online for the phrase seamless texture along with the word for the thing you're looking for, such in this case as brick wall. As you can see, once it's imported, it has created our 3D component for us, thanks to the use of this import option here. Now, when I then click on to create a textured area component and select it, when I click apply, we get a nice textured effect very efficiently. So let's click apply and close. But as you can see, this is quite a rough texture, which won't translate to 3D carving so well. So we want to probably apply a bit of a smooth to this. So we'll go to the smoothing tool in the modeling panel. And this software will automatically warn us that it wants to bake this before we're allowed to edit. It's important to note that while we are going to say OK to this, this stops it from being a tiled component and it just becomes a natural component within the software. You can no longer use the special tiling effect with this component. So let's apply a little bit of a smooth. That's a bit too much, let's go a bit less. So we want to just sort of take the rough edges off and give ourselves a nice final effect. I click OK, and we have our final component. And just to illustrate my point, if we tried to scale this down, previously it would have worked well with the tiled effect, but now the whole component just shrinks as it would as a normal component. So do keep that in mind when you're creating your components and then applying things like baking or smoothing to them after the fact. Let's delete this component and my original wall. Let's have another couple of examples of different clip art using the tiling. I'm going to go back into the clip art panel and then let's go down and select one of the wave tiles and just drag that into the project. As you can see, it's quite a nice wavy effect that we've got here. So let's go back into modeling and look into our texture area component once more. Let's try getting a bit of a variety of effects with this. So let's mirror the top two and see what effect this gives us. Not so good. Let's flip them back. And then just try flipping the right-hand column. There we go, that gives us a much more pleasing effect. So as you can see here, we've got our nice texture effect applied in our 3D panel. So this looks quite good. I think maybe we could as well get away with a little bit of Y shift. So let's try putting in a 50% Y shift as well. That doesn't look too bad. I think it could do with a little bit of smoothing now though, so let's do that next. So let's close that out and we'll apply smoothing. As before, we're told that we must be baking it first, so we'll click OK. And we won't preserve the transparency and we shall apply a healthy amount of smoothing to this. That gives us a nice final effect for our design and we could be happy with that. Now let's close out of this again. Delete the components we've been working with. And we'll try one more piece of clip art. Let's have a look. Let's go with this diamond plate. So we'll pull this into the project, go back to our modeling panel, and again open up our texture area component. If we just click apply to see what we start with, we'll see that it doesn't look particularly interesting as it is. And I think we want to get more of a crisscross design going on here. So I think to achieve this, we probably want to try and get some spacing involved here. So let's try a -33 and a 33 in our spacing. So we get a much tighter fit there, and we might be able to get away with a -33 on the Y as well. Yes, okay, so these are looking all right. Now if we try to mirror some of these, so if we want to mirror this one to be at a 90 degrees, let's try that. And then we want to have the top left one as well. And that gives us quite a good crisscross effect. Maybe if we have a slightly smaller spacing involved here, so let's try 25 for each. And as you can see, we can adjust the effect of our tiling on the fly as much as we like until we get exactly what we're looking for. Maybe 15%. And I always encourage people to try and just experiment with this tool, as you can get many varieties of effects just from playing around with it slightly as you go along. Let's try a 33% shift as well, just to see what this effect can give. Maybe a 50% in both actually, let's try that. Oh, that's quite an interesting effect. I think we'll go with that one. We'll apply that and close. But as you can see, just from playing around with a few different values, we can achieve many different effects overall. So, like I said before, I encourage you to experiment and try out different values and different pieces of original clip art to see what you can achieve. Let's delete out this component and our original one as well. And the final piece we'll be covering on our video today will be some of the additional clip art that we include with the software. If you look in the clip art folder, you'll see that there is the texture fill tiles. These look very similar to the texture area tiles. However, they are pre-constructed to be texture area components. So, for example, if I just pull in this diamond plate file again, you can see that it looks like just a normal piece of clip art. However, it's pre-made to be tileable, so as I pull it out, you'll see that it is actually a full tile component in itself, so that you can just grab and drop these straight into a project where appropriate, so that way you can always use these texture components in your own projects. Or if you want to, drop some of your own files into this folder, so that you can use them and keep them all in one place for convenience. So let me just delete out this component and I'll show you a couple of the other options, such as this bow circle. And then I'll drag this out to show you the effect. You can see this one's a very interesting effect, very modern art decor. And it would be very easy to just carve out this and use it as a feature tile for a wall set, for example. And one last example, a square wave tile. And again, it looks quite normal by itself, but then I can drag it out to create a large tiling texture effect. So do experiment with these, see what you can achieve with them, and hopefully this will help you in your future projects. Thank you very much for watching our video, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video.